I know there's a delay.
Just checking if it's coming through okay, but I think. Okay, all good to go. It's coming through now. So, hi everyone who watches in today. Want to introduce Catherine McKenzie, and thanks so much, Catherine, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Catherine is a best selling author who has sold over 1 million books. She practiced law in Montreal for 20 years before retiring to write full time. One of her recent novels, You Can't Catch Me, has been optioned for TV series by Paramount TV. And she's an avid runner, skier, and amateur tennis player. And she lives and writes in Montreal, Canada. And I have to say, I just recently read your latest book, 6 Weeks to Live. I read it on Kindle, so I can't show you my copy, but
No worries.
absolutely loved it. It's the first book of yours I've read, and have to give it 5 out of 5. It was, yeah, a
Oh,
really
thank you.
sort of different concept and everything in the book, which was great and really, really gripped me and wanted me to keep reading it to know what happened in the end. So, yeah,
Well,
thanks so
that's the
much.
goal. That's the goal.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks so much for joining us. Just wondering if you want to start off by telling us a bit more about your book.
Sure. So it's called 6 Weeks to Live. Ooh, there you go. And it's about a woman who discovers that she has 6 weeks to live, but that also that somebody tried to poison her potentially a year earlier. And so she decides to use the time she has left to solve her murder, or her attempted murder, I guess.
Mm, mm. And could you tell us what, when you started to write this book, what was the very first thing you thought of?
Somebody in my extended family got a tragic diagnosis and had a clock put on their life.
Mm,
And it just got me thinking just in general about what that was like and what I might do in the same situation, and watching the decisions that she made about how she chose to spend her time and what was important to her and how different it was than what I might do with my time. And um, you know, I think the writer's brain then goes to like, oh, how could I turn this into a story? And
yeah.
obviously not about her, but
Mm,
and then at some point I think it was like, well, what if you discovered that the reason you were dying wasn't just an accident? And I think that was really the starting premise or the
yeah.
starting point of the book for me.
Yeah, yeah. And without giving away too much about the book, what sort of research did you do for the book?
So I started off with an idea of what cancer I wanted it to be,
Mm,
um, and then I had to sort of think, and then I had an idea, well, that poisoning might cause that cancer. And then I was like, oh, I should probably look into that, make sure, make sure
it
that's
really
accurate.
does.
And,
Yeah.
and, and luckily, as sometimes happens, book serendipity, there is a potential link between certain toxic metals and certain kinds of brain cancer, which is what the character has in
Mm,
this book. And so
mm.
I think most of my research, honestly, was around like those dreaded Google searches that authors do. How do you poison someone without a trace? And what's the half-life of lead? And,
Mm.
and then I'd randomly be like, an essay, I'm just an author, not trying to kill anyone. So that was the main research, honestly, was some research into the chemistry and causes of different types of brain cancer, and then obviously what the effects were in terms of having that cancer, and what might happen over the course of the final countdown.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
I said before, you're a new author to me. This was your first book that I've read,
right.
but you have read a lot of other, written a lot of other books.
Yep, yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about how many you've written and how long you've been writing for? And
Yeah, sure. I mean, I started writing novels in 2006,
mm,
which is, I don't even know how many years ago now, but a while. And my first book was published in 2010 in Canada. It's a book called Spin. It's about a journalist who follows a celebrity into rehab, and it was more of a romantic comedy, despite the dark setting of rehab. And my first three books were more in the sort of romantic comedy, chick lit, as they called it then, vein. Though I was never into shoes or fashion, so I don't know if I ever really fit into the sort of classic Sophie Kinsella chick lit. In fact, I think I didn't, but anyway. And then I moved more into sort of psychological suspense and eventually mystery, suspense thrillers. And that's really been what I've been writing since 2015.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have 12 novels. Is that right? Is this number 12 or number 11? I'm so confused now because, I publish basically a book a year. And so I've already written the next year's book.
Yeah.
I think next year's number 13. So anyway, I've already written number 13 and this is number 12. I think that's right.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a lot. It's more than 10. How's
hard
that?
to keep track of them. Yeah. And I mentioned at the beginning that You Can't Catch Me has been optioned for TV. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that came out last year in the pandemic. Yay. And it's about a woman who named Jessica Williams, who meets another woman named Jessica Williams at an airport bar. And they talk briefly and she goes on her vacation. When she comes home, all her money's been stolen. And the police aren't going to do anything about it. So she decides to go looking for herself. And she discovers a string of of identically named victims along the way. There's a lot of Jessicas in that book.
Okay. So if I'm looking to read another one of your books, would you suggest that one to read next?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have a favorite of my books, but I think it depends. If you like thriller, suspense, you like 6 Weeks to Live, then yeah, definitely You Can't Catch Me, or my book I'll Never Tell, which is sort of like an Agatha Christie murder mystery set at a summer camp, but involving adults. Those are probably more in your lane.
Yeah. And how far along is have they started doing something with the TV series?
Yeah, I think that is pretty early stages, to be honest.
Yeah.
My other book I'll Never Tell is also optioned. And that I've read a script of a pilot. So we'll see, like the TV stuff, it's amazing, but it's so impossible to control. And it's completely out of your hands. And I think it's important to do that. Like, if you're going to let people option your work, you have to kind of be ready to let go. So I'm happy to be involved, and I'm happy that they keep me up to date, but it's a very different process than book writing, where, I know approximately when I turn on a book, when it's going to be published within a couple of months, and it follows a sort of predictable path. And that's very different in the TV world.
Yeah. And I think as well, being a reader who's then gone on to watch movies or TV series, sometimes it's a lot different. So I suppose as a writer, you really have to be able to let all that go. And
you just have to let go, I think, because, any story, if you gave 10 writers the same premise for a book, you'd end up with 10 different books, right? And so I think, and I think also having adapted somebody else's work and worked collaboratively with people, and even just when I was like very heady experience having calls with Hollywood about my books and what their vision was, it was interesting to me what people focused on, which was not necessarily what I would focus on when I was writing it. And writing a book is a very different medium than TV or movies, right? It's a different way of exploring a story. And so, like, if you're turning a book into a movie, you really need to compress it. And if you're turning it into a TV show, you need to expand it. And so it's just a different experience all the way around. But it was cool to see. It was cool to see the script for I'll Never Tell, which really, still felt like my story and recognizable. So that was cool.
Yeah. And it must be very exciting to know that someone wants to do that as well.
Yeah, sure. It's flattering for sure.
Mm. We've got quite a few people watching, so just reminding
Great.
people watching that if you have any questions for Catherine, please type them in comments and I can read them out to her. I'm interested to know, had you always wanted to be a writer? We spoke before that you were a lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
I actually always wanted to be a lawyer, and
mm,
maybe I wanted to be an actress, but um, you know what? I wrote growing up. I wrote poetry growing up, but
mm,
I never really thought about for myself book writing as a career. Um, and I think over my 20s, a couple of times I'd read a book that I loved, and then I'd be like, I'm going to write a book. And I remember doing this after I read Foucault's Pendulum. And I sat down and I wrote, I don't know, 10 pages of something I don't even have anymore.
mm,
And I was like, I need to do a lot of research and I don't know what I'm doing. And this is just rewriting Foucault's Pendulum, blah, 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 you know? Um, and so when I started writing my first novel, I really, that wasn't my intention. I just had an idea that wouldn't leave me alone and I didn't know
yeah.
what to do with it. And eventually I started writing it down and
And was
that
that
eventually,
while you still were working in your other career?
oh yeah. And I mean, I was
Yeah.
working till August of last year.
Okay,
So
so it's only
yeah, I did
recently.
both for a long
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the realities of the book world is for most people, you actually need to keep your day job if
Yeah.
you,
Mm,
even if you're writing a book a year and have some success as I have. So, but I think, you know, the good thing for me about doing both for a long time was also just staying in the world. I think, um, you know, it's that one of the many things. Obviously, it's been tough in the last year and a half, but for
mm,
creative people, is that you know being alone with your thoughts all day. A lot of people said like, "Oh, this is great for writers. You'll just all write, you know, 50 books in the pandemic." And it's like, that's kind of not how it works,
mm,
um, because a lot of and it's not stealing other people's stories or their dialogue or anything like that, but it's being in the world and interacting with other
yeah.
people and being an observer. And when that gets
Mm,
taken away and your focus gets sort of more and more narrow, it's not really good for the creative process for most people. So, you know, a lot, obviously everyone's been struggling, but definitely, you know, it was actually always something I was concerned about writing full time was not being in the world. And so I've had to find other ways to still have that social interaction, hence my amateur tennis and
yeah.
things like that.
To be able to hear other people's conversations and
Oh, just yeah, and just to have those
yeah,
conversations and just to not be in your own head all day. All you know,
yeah.
I mean, like my current office is a room in my basement, and I like
Mm.
said to my husband that like I'm going to my writing cave, you know, and it's good. I can be productive down there, but like you don't want to live in a cave either, right? You
Mm,
know, I'm writing
exactly.
contemporary fiction. I need to be in the contemporary world. So
Yeah, yeah. And I've got a question from Marjat. She says, while you were writing your book, do you ever think this would become an awesome movie or TV series? Does that ever
you know, I
cross your
really
mind?
try not to think about that when I'm
Mm,
writing, because I think, and you know, what, I do now also have like film and TV stuff going on my own on the side, and it's really a different medium. Obviously, the storytelling is storytelling, and there's some commonalities, but if you read a book that was just a TV script, you'd be like, "Where's the rest of this?" You know,
yeah.
because scripts are almost entirely dialogue, and and even more compressed dialogue because there's just limits on page
Mm,
numbers, and you know you don't get all the internal thoughts and stuff like that. So I think personally, I just want to, when I'm writing a novel, and I like kind of doing both. The novel is its own form, and it has its positives and its negatives. But I think it really does allow you to spend time with characters and get to know them in a way that you might not, and really in any other medium. And I think one of the things that's really cool about it is that you do take, you know, one sense reading, right?
yeah.
And you turn that into all of the senses. And I don't think that there's another medium that's really like that.
Mm,
So in script writing, it's you're writing it to be shot because it's a visual medium. And so it's a different you make different choices when you're writing in a medium that's meant to be reproduced visually as opposed to being reproduced in somebody's mind.
yeah.
So yeah, I just try not to think about that. I mean, I take it as a compliment. I think when people have said from the beginning that my books would make great movies or
Yeah.
TV shows, and I always used to joke, or bad ones,
Yeah.
because it's very easy to make a bad TV show or
Yeah.
movie. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And can you tell us anything about what you're working on at the moment?
Sure. So my next book is called Please Join Us. And as of right now, it's coming out on June 7th, 2022.
Mm.
And it's about a woman who joins a secretive women's organization that turns sinister.
Okay. Sounds very interesting.
Yeah, hopefully I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and how far along are you? If it's due out in June, how far along are you?
So it's turned in, it's finished.
Okay,
I'm getting the
so it's in
copy
the
edit back
editing. Yeah.
in August. Yeah.
Mm,
So
okay.
yeah, it's the weird thing about this business is like you've already written the next one when this
Yeah.
one comes out often, and then I'm, working actually on the book after that. So
Yeah, so now that you've turned that one in, have you started writing something else as well?
yeah,
Or?
I'm working on something else. That's too
Yeah.
early to talk about,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I have been
Yeah,
working on it.
so you're promoting one and then you've got it, so it's actually really like three a bit on the
Yeah, and then
go,
every
is
once
it?
in a while, someone's like, "Oh, I'd love to do a book club about like some book I wrote 5 years ago," and I'm like, "Okay, I'm not sure I remember what that's about, but no
Yeah.
problem, we'll talk about it."
Yeah. And are all your books standalone?
Yeah, they're all standalone except for I did write a novella sequel to my book Spin, but it
Okay.
follows like one of the, not the main character, but one of the side characters from the first book. For me personally, and like if I was just going to be purely financial about my approach to writing, I would have come up with a series and written a series. But for me, when I write a book, I know it's done when I don't have questions about the characters
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah.
Because I pick them up at a sort of a crisis point, and I take them through the crisis to a resolution, and then I'm done with them. I don't mean that in a bad way, but I'm never wondering about what's going to happen. Somebody asked me on Twitter the other day, in 6 weeks, and I can't totally repeat the question because I don't want to give away what happened in the book, but there are 3 daughters who are triplets in the book, and somebody was asking a question about the triplet, what are the triplets doing now? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
like, oh, it would be cool if you wrote a sequel about the triplets now. And I
Yeah.
was like, no, not really. Yeah.
So you think that's something you'd never do, or maybe
I mean, never say never in this
Yeah.
life, obviously, right? But again, I mean, I think you see this done usually the most badly. There's a few examples where that's not the case, but in general, like with romantic comedies, like when I started out there and people are like, oh, I'd love to see a sequel to this book. And I'm like, would you really? Because then I have to break up the couple.
Yeah.
And, it's like all the things that made you like it in the first place, I have to undo all of those things. And I think that's kind of the same thing with the book. I had to think about it for I'll Never Tell and You Can't Catch Me Again, just in the context of it maybe becoming a TV show. What would a second season look like if there was going to be a second season? And so I've had to give some thought sometimes to that. And I'm sure I could craft a story, but, I think it would be, for me, when I write, I think of concept and story first, and then characters come from that. And so to start with existing characters and then have to think about a story that these people would be in is like the complete opposite of my normal process.
Yeah.
So I just don't know, where that would turn out. And again, I think it's, I sort of feel like it's a second dessert, like sounds like a good idea, but probably not going to enjoy it that much, So.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, when you had your first book published, how hard or easy was that for you?
It was definitely a long process for sure. And it wasn't my first book. I mean, the first book I wrote lives in a drawer and was never going to be published. And then I wrote a book that eventually was published called Arranged, but it was not the book that I got my book deal from. And then I wrote another book that again was eventually published. And then it was really my 4th novel, Spin, was the 4th novel that I wrote that got published. And that took 18 months of being out on 18 months of being out on submission with Arranged and getting turned down over and over and over again. In the meantime, I wrote this book, and it eventually led to a book deal. There's a famous thing about J.K. Rowling getting 12 rejections or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, that is actually very, very, very few rejections.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a typical story. And it's told the wrong way, I think. It's like, the right way is like, she only got 12 rejections.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it took a long time. I mean, I think from when first I had to find an agent and then try and sell a book. So I think from when I got my agent, it was to the sale was 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And working in law and becoming a writer, how did you do that? Did you do some courses, or it's just something you decided now's the time to do it and you started doing it, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I really learned how to write it. Look, I've always been a big reader, and I think that's key. If you want to write, you need to be a big reader for many, many, many reasons. But when I meet people who are like, oh, I don't read that much, but yeah, I want to write. And I'm like, it's like a musician telling me they don't listen to music. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think I did I mean, short answer, no, I didn't take courses, and no, I don't have an MFA in writing, and you don't need to, but if you don't have those things, you have to kind of acquire those skills in different ways. And so what I did is, I read a bunch of stuff. Like, I started thinking about, well, what is a novel? Like, how long is a novel, first of all, right? How many words is that? I don't know. So, I did that kind of research, and like, how long should a chapter be? So I started looking at books in a mechanical way and breaking them down, like how much prose, how much dialogue. And again, I had internalized a lot of that because I had just read so much in my life at that point. I started reading when I was like 3 years old, and I was just always a voracious reader. So once I started approaching books from a critical way, I was able to sort of see the mechanics. And it is something, I was always a storyteller. Like, in my group of friends, I was like the storyteller in the group, and being a lawyer, I did litigation. That's also storytelling, is a lot of that function. So I had a bunch of different pieces of it already in different training, and it was putting that together and figuring out, what worked and what didn't, and then just keep learning along the way. I have read craft books subsequently. Going through editorial process the first time, it took me 3 or 4 tries to understand and be able to translate what my editor was asking me to do in the book. Whereas now, if I got that, I mean, I might not even make that mistake that I was making from the beginning, or I'd be able to self-assess. But if she told me what it was, it'd be like, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. And I'll think about it for a few days, and I'll figure out how to do that. So, yeah, and I mean, I'm always still learning. I'm always trying to do something new, different, and push myself. My first 3 books were first person present, because that's just how I came out on the page. And then I was like, I should try a book in third person, So I think I think there are 2 paths, really, which is that formal training, which I think is great if that's what you want to do. And I don't think not having the formal training isn't a barrier, but you do still need to put in your 10,000 hours, or, whatever it is to hone your craft. Like, nobody sits down with 0 training and just like writes an amazing novel, that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And have you found, as you've written more and more, that your writing has become easier to do, and has it been quicker for you the more you've written?
No, I honestly, it goes in waves, and it depends on the book. Some things are easier, some things are harder. This is a mental game. Like, I could go run 5K even if I hadn't done anything for 6 months, just because a lot of that is mental, and I know I could do it, right? And it's kind of like that with the book. I know I can write the book, which I didn't know when I was writing my first book. I know I can do it. I know the effort that's required. But I am writing more complicated, sophisticated books than when I started writing. And so that is harder. I try to elevate my language. And then at the same time, how many ways can you say that somebody got dressed or looked at somebody? And so sometimes it can feel stale and difficult just to have your characters do really basic things, because it's like I've literally used up every way to explain this, or I've used up every analogy that I can think of, or aphorism, or whatever, so some things are harder. It's harder to keep it fresh for me. And you don't want, if it's not fresh for you, then it's not going to feel fresh and interesting for the reader either. So it really is important to pick that idea that won't leave you alone, that won't let you go, so that you're excited through the work of writing to put that story on the page. And I don't know that I'm faster. I was very fast in the beginning. I think I had sort of a backlog of ideas, and then I got slower, and now I probably have a similar pace. I have more time to do it now, but that doesn't necessarily, I'm maybe a bit faster, but not that much.
Yeah. And Mary's wondering if there's any writers that inspire you.
I mean, I think a lot of writers, honestly, I think when I read a book that I love, that inspires me. And over time, that's been, a lot of different people. I grew up reading all the Anna Green Gables books, and a redheaded Canadian, so obviously. But, I also read a lot of detective fiction growing up. And when I got older, I love Nick Hornby's books. I love John Green. I love The Night Circus. And I think now I've kind of moved away, it's silly to say, as somebody who has a lot of books. There are definitely writers where I've read every book that they've written.
Yeah.
But I find now often, just because of the nature of my job and the reading time that I have and what I try and do with that time, that I try and split it between, obviously I read in my genre. I read a lot of books to blurb. So, other writers, right, ask you to read a book, right? Yeah. And so, so that's a different kind of reading. Like, even though, I'm not going to blurb something if I didn't like it, but it's still different than me, like, going into a bookstore and discovering something and picking it up. And then I do try and, again, because I'm a contemporary writer, I try and read some of the big books outside of my genre, just to still be in what's going on. And so, and just to be inspired, by, like, what else are people writing? I don't want to only read what I write. That's boring.
And I'm wondering if there is anything you've read recently that you could recommend to us.
Sure. So some books that I loved in the last year and a half, which is like a high bar, because I had trouble reading for a while in the pandemic. So The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hugo by Stuart Turton, or Seven Deaths, depending where you lived. It has a slightly different title, but a fantastic book and really ambitious. And just as a writer, I was, even a writer who's written a lot of complicated books, I was like, okay, how did he do this? And I loved also The Midnight Library by Matt Haig.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I also loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. My Dark Vanessa. So those are 4 books, I think, that have stood out to me a lot. I liked Mary Kubica's most recent book, Local Woman Missing, if you're looking for a thriller recommendation. And if you're looking for, like, a fun summer read, my friend Alyssa Friedland's Last Summer at the Golden Hotel. It's set in the Catskills, in one of those old hotels, like in Dirty Dancing, that's about to close, and super fun, a fun read.
Yeah. No, thanks for those recommendations. It's always great to get more to add to our lists.
There's always too many books.
Yeah, exactly. Marjot's wondering if any of your books have been translated into other languages.
Yeah, a bunch of my books have been translated into French, and then some are in German, Czech, Slovak, Polish. I think I have one in Korean, one in Russian now.
Yeah,
So
so
yeah,
quite a
yeah,
wide,
yeah,
yeah. And one thing that always really interests me is seeing the different covers for
yeah,
the different countries. Some of them are, yeah. Have you
yeah. Every once
noticed
in a
that
while,
with
it's like, really? There's like the
mm,
Turkish cover of one of my books where I was like, that's scaring me. And my book is not a horror book. I don't
okay.
know what that's about. But yeah, I mean, other than French, which I live in Canada, like I grew up speaking French, and
Yeah.
and that's a bit different because um I've had two different French publishers, but in Quebec, I've actually been shown a draft of the translation and have some input in it.
Mm,
And what I'm looking for is I want to feel like I'm reading the same book. So I don't care so much about the literal word for word translation because it doesn't always translate.
yeah.
But I want to feel like I'm reading the same book. And then I had a French from France publisher, and I was actually on the radio in French here in Quebec, and they wanted me to read from the book, and I actually hadn't read any of it. And I started reading the first page, and there's like 3 words I didn't know because
Uh,
French from France is a more formal language than French
mm.
from Quebec. And even the broadcaster was like, well, that's an unusual word. What was the word in English? And I'm like, I don't know.
Uh,
Like, I don't know what that word is, how to pronounce it. But when I read it in another, or if the German version arrives or whatever, I have no idea if it's
mm,
well translated
yeah.
or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
And every once in a while I'll get tagged in a foreign review. And then it's always like, do I want to press the Google Translate on this? Yes or no? You know?
And do you find that some particular countries your books are really, really popular in? More,
I think I've had a couple of books do really well so I think my book Forgotten did quite well in Brazil in
okay.
Portuguese.
Yeah.
Like that's the one I think that I've been tagged in the most times of any of
Mm,
my foreign publications.
mm,
And still now sometimes like on Instagram or whatever, it will come up. Um, so that's always fun. And they had a good cover for it too.
yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't get the sense that I'm super popular. I mean, I'm not that popular where I live, so who knows?
Mary's wondering when and where you write, and I'm wondering, do you have like a structured day for your writing?
Yeah, so I didn't used to, and I used to like mostly write on the couch with the TV on,
Hmm.
and I just still do that sometimes. As I think I mentioned before, I now have an office in my basement, and so yeah, I try and do 2 sessions. So I'm usually down there 9:30 to noon, and then I'll try and do an afternoon session as well, but it's
Mm,
shorter. Usually I'm done by 3. My creative brain is finished, and uh, usually what I'm doing is working on 2 different things at once, and so
mm,
I'll write like the more challenge. I've always been a better morning big brain, like something that requires a lot of brain work for me needs to be done in the morning, whether that was my law job or writing or whatever. Um, so I'll do that in the morning, and then maybe I'll work on a script in the afternoon
yeah.
or something like
Yeah.
that.
Mm. And Belinda's wondering, when you start writing, do you know how your story's going to end?
Yes,
Always?
yes.
You always do?
I always, yeah. I mean, maybe there's a few exceptions where things have shifted a little bit along the
Yeah.
way. But yeah, for me, particularly writing mystery, suspense, thriller, I have to know who done it, why done it, how done
Mm.
it before I start writing. Because
Yeah.
otherwise there's too much of, for me anyway, having to go back and fix things and things don't make sense. And you haven't
Yeah.
left the right amount of clues. And I don't want, I'm a reader too, right? And I think we've all read those books where you get to the end and you're like, what? No, like, come on. And I don't want that to be, I want people to be surprised,
Yeah.
hopefully, but I don't want them to be like, that's impossible. I think it has to be fair to the reader. And so I want the reader to be able to go back and say like, oh, that's what that meant. I read it this way, but really what this meant was this. So, so it's important for me to know where I'm going, and that also drives the writing. I'm not a big outliner, so I don't have
Mm.
detailed outlines,
Mm.
but because I know where I'm going and I know where I have some big signposts through the books, like buy this moment, this is when this twist should be revealed. It's important for me to get there. You know, Stephen King says he just starts writing, he doesn't know where it's going, there's no outline. I mean, maybe that's true. I actually have my doubts. Because I think even if you're not writing stuff down, like particularly somebody who's been writing for that long and writes every day, you know, your subconscious is going on. You've got story in your head, and you have an idea where you're going. It's not just like, let's see where these characters go today. Tapey. You know?
So would you say you're quite a big planner?
No,
you know,
I'm not a complete pants, like, so there's pantsters, plotters, planners.
Yeah.
I really probably put myself in between. Like, I know somebody who writes like a 25-page outline, or somebody else I know who writes a 60-page outline before they start writing their book. And to me, that's just a rough first draft, honestly. So no, I don't do that. But I outline as I go along. I spend a lot of time on the first third of the book working out the kinks in the story.
Yeah.
So again, I think about, when I'm not writing, I'm thinking about what's going to happen in the book and what is happening in the book and what the characters are up to. And so that is, but like, just to give you an example, I have to go back and rearrange or fix the first third of my next book. And like, these are my notes to do that, you know, like, so that's about as outliney as I get. Sort of like, I've just jotted down a bunch of ideas. I've highlighted some stuff. This is, I think, in the right order of how it's going to come out. But once I start writing it, it may or may not come out like that.
Yeah. And Mary's wondering if you read your reviews.
I do. Yeah, I don't have the willpower not to. I think I'm less obsessive about it now than I used to be. But I knew I didn't have the willpower to do that, to not read them. And so I decided to read everything as a way to inure myself to the criticism. So it's always like the first reviews that come out for a book, those are always the hardest to read. I'll be honest, particularly if they're negative ones, because it's like, it's still fresh in your mind. And it's like, thank you for helping to ruin the reputation of my book. But though obviously people can write whatever they want, that's, you know, it's okay. There are books that I don't like either. But yeah, I mean, I was sort of famous in my group of writer friends for having read like every single 1-star Amazon review of one of my books. Which is true. I stopped doing it, you know, a couple of years ago, but I definitely, but I do think, and I was actually just saying this today, I think that there is value in it not just on the positive side. Obviously it's nice to read praise, but on the negative side, if you're getting a consistent through line of comments, you can learn from that. You know, it's like, okay, like not the 1-star for language. Like, you know, if you don't want to read swear words, don't read my books. You know, it's about like murder, mayhem, whatever. There's bad people in there and they swear, so get over it. But, you know, there's other things, more structural things or pacing things, which I can learn. Like, I'm not a perfect novelist. Nobody is. And we can all still learn. And that is a way of learning, right?
No, that's a great answer. Margaret, she was the one who asked the question before about what languages your books have been translated into. She's from Finland, and she was wondering if any have been translated to Finnish.
No Finnish translations yet. Sorry. It's completely out of my control. So.
Yeah. She's hoping that maybe there might be one later.
I mean, if she knows someone in publishing there.
Jill wonders if you have a favourite genre to write.
I mean, I think I naturally now come out in the sort of thriller suspense genre, in the sense that I like complex, messy stories with surprises in them. But you know, I wrote a rom-com movie script, and that was fun too. Like, there's definitely some things I don't think I'd ever write. Like, I don't think I'm going to write epic fantasy. it's not something that I read very often, and I just don't think that's where my talents lie. But I've shifted over the course of my career, and I could shift in another direction, and I really just try to go where the story takes me. So, I think, yeah, I don't want to be phoning it in. I don't want to be writing something that I feel like I've written before.
Yeah.
I always take it as a compliment when people say, "Oh, she always comes up with these unique premises," and like I do work at that. That is something that I try to do. And there's certainly in every genre, but in my genre too, there's 4 or 5 tropes, of like, oh, this is going to be one of those books, and they can be really well executed, but I try not to do that.
Yeah.
If I can, mostly for myself.
And what do you hope that readers will love about your books?
I mean, I hope that, first of all, I just want to be telling a good story that you can't put down. I think as a reader, especially as a teenager and as a young kid, I remember getting lost in a book and you could talk to me and I wouldn't even hear you, and it's so rare to still have that, to get that lost in a story that you can't put down. And so I remember the first time that somebody said, "Oh, I read your book in 4 hours." And I was like, "What? That thing I spent 2 years writing?"
Yeah.
And then I've realized actually it's a compliment. That means that there was nothing that kicked them out of the story and they had to know what was going on. And so that is really what I hope. That's what I'm trying to do every time is write a book that people feel that way about. And then, on a secondary level, I like writing complex women. I really try to show women the way they are and not the way they're often portrayed in books, which is not the same thing. And I really push against this idea that characters have to be, likable and they can't have any dark sides to them. I think life is gray. And I think we all have dark sides, like maybe not Mother Teresa, but, everyone else. And probably even Mother Teresa, right? Like there's probably some mornings she woke up and she was like, not feeling it today, but so I think it's important to me to tell sort of strong female driven stories, that are, like, whether men read them or not, I don't care. I've never understood why women read stories about men and men won't read stories about women, but whatever. I don't need to get on my soapbox, but yeah, I want there I want, there's usually each book has maybe a theme or an underlying message, and I don't want to hit anybody over the head with that. But in 6 weeks, sorry, go ahead.
No, and do you said about men reading, but do you find that you have many males reading your books?
I think it depends on the book, honestly. Look, the reality is that 70% of fiction readers are women. So already men read way, way less fiction than women. And then they do, I can't remember what the stat is, but they tend to read books by men. And so, of course, some men read my books, as they should. Like, why not? If it's a good story, who cares if the protagonist is a woman, And interestingly, I've had books where my book Fractured is a dual narrative, and 60% of the book is narrated by a man.
Okay.
But I don't think more men read that book than others. So I just try not to really care about that, to be honest. Because it doesn't make any sense to me.
And one thing I noticed with reading 6 Weeks to Live is the ending sort of left a lot of unanswered questions, I think.
Right.
Is that, which as a reader, I know some readers get upset about that, but as a reader, I didn't really get up. I still love the book. Is that common in your books?
I think the central question is answered, like, who did it, why they did it, and how they did it, right? So it's true that I haven't tied up every other loose end in a neat bow. I think I've answered all the questions that I was interested in knowing the answers to, and
Yeah.
life is not, life doesn't tie up in a neat bow, right? And so I think particularly when you're writing about a tragedy, that like there's going to be a moment and I could write some epilogue 2 years later, blah blah, but it just, to me, I don't know if that really gives that much of a value to it. So I think, are there always going to be some unanswered questions? Yeah, of course. I try not to leave like big questions unanswered, obviously. And I am trying to make sure that all the threads connect. If that makes sense. But to the extent that in your mind the characters go on after the book, I've had books where the perpetrator got away with it, for instance.
Yeah.
So, if they get away with it, like everything is not, there's nobody shows up to arrest them, and right. So, but the important people know who did it, I guess is the point. So yeah, I'm not trying to let anybody down, but when the story feels done to me, that's when I stop.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for talking to me today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks for having me.
And as I said at the start, I really, really enjoyed 6 Weeks to Live. It was 5 out of 5 for me. So hoping that lots of people watching will go out and read the book as well. And looking forward to reading more of your books.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, and thanks for everyone else who joined in and asked some questions. And hopefully in the future we might be able to talk to you again when you have a new book out.
Next year.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.